Do you feel like sometimes you truly just don't understand men? Well, what if I told you that it's really because you don't understand our motives and you don't understand our strategies? But what if I also told you secretly, I can actually share with you what those strategies are? Join me on today's show where we'll be discussing how I would force you to fall in love with me. That way you can see right through every man you will ever date from now on. I'll see you and I might spot you and say, oh my God, her dump truck is amazing. Oh my God, her yitty's amazing. Oh my God, her whole body, amazing. I'm gonna say, wait a second. She's an attractive woman. She's very good looking. And there's probably a lot of men here that also feel that same way about her, right? That she's an attractive woman and they all want her as well. But here's the thing. My biggest mistake as a man will be approaching you the same way that all these other men approach you. Because if I approach you that same way, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to categorize me in the same category that you've been categorizing all the other men in your life that you've probably said no to, which is exactly why you're single. So now instead of approaching you from the standpoint that all of them are going to approach you, which is most likely to talk about your looks, right? Because you're an attractive woman. And if I can recognize that, then all the other men who are talking to you can also recognize that. So the last thing I'm going to mention to you if I'm coming up to you is your looks or your attractiveness. Because if I mention the thing that all the other guys will mention at the beginning, I'm putting myself right in their same category. And remember, I'm trying to create a barrier between me and them. So what am I going to do instead? I'm going to focus on pinpointing something totally unrelated to your looks, as if I don't even realize that they exist. Okay? Now, this is going to sound a little bit weird and twisted, but it's a good tactic for me to separate myself from all the other men. Because now I can convince you that the reason I actually approached you was for some other reason other than the fact that I found you attractive. When in reality, the only reason I first even bothered to approach you was because I found you attractive. Now, that isn't even necessarily a bad thing. But what I want that to do for you is I want it to crystallize your understanding of men and their motives. So when he comes up to you and he tells you, hey, I really like your sweater. Or he tells you, hey, you come here often? Or, hey, I noticed you dropped your lipstick back there, whatever the case may be, whatever stupid thing that they come up with, right? Or you look like a volleyball player. It's always because they find you attractive and they're looking for a way to start and strike a conversation with you without being just like the rest of the crowd. Because the easiest thing for them to say is, hey, I think you look beautiful and I'm bothering to come up to you and talk to you because I think that you're beautiful, okay? However, that might not necessarily work on a woman like you who's been getting those same compliments from all the other men. These are our books. What do I mean by our books? When we go out on this first date, right? This is a very pivotal point in the relationship. This is our first chance to understand what our dynamic is and to get a little bit of an understanding of each other. So what I want to do on this first date, those of you who are OG members know where I'm going. I'm going to get you to give me the play-by-play on you. And as I'm learning all this, I'm taking in as much information as I possibly can. Two things are happening simultaneously. One, I'm able to get a great understanding of you and what your desires are, what you need, and what is the most important thing to you. Because as you talk about all of these different topics in your life, I'm able to start pinpointing some themes. Let me give you an example of that. Let's say you start talking about your life and you start going into the fact that, your relationship with your mother and your father and your siblings is so important to you because family is so big for you. And you really, when you're looking for a new partner, you're thinking about someone who also cares about family because you want them to be close to your family. And you tell me how your past relationships haven't worked out because your family didn't accept those men. And they weren't really keen on creating a bond with your family. And you've always envisioned a place where you can be in your romantic relationship where your partner feels like they're part of your family, and your family accepts them as if that you were one of theirs, right? So you talk about that at length because that's how you feel. And that's how you feel towards a relationship, and those are your desires. Now, I'm starting to get an understanding of your book. I'm able to read through your book and better understand you. But remember, this strategy is about how I force you to fall in love with me. So in this strategy where I'm getting you to fall in love with me, as you're sharing all of these amazing details, you're also thinking to yourself, wow, not only am I, feeling good about saying this to him and all of the stuff that we're sharing with each other, but I also feel closer to this guy because I'm getting the opportunity to share these things that most people wouldn't even bother to listen to. And as you're talking about this, I'm listening so intently and making it seem like I'm really interested in what you have to say. And then you ask me things like, because I'm asking a lot of great questions, you ask me things like, what about you? You learn a lot about nothing, and the only answers you get are vague and very unspecific. Because when you ask me about what I want and my dreams and my aspirations, I say things like, you know what, I've always dreamed of being successful, but I'm just trying to figure out what success really means. Anyways, so as I was saying, with your family, tell me about what your relationship has been like with your brother. Did you guys fight a lot when you were younger? And I get you in a place where every time you ask me a little question about me, and every time you ask me to give you a little bit more information about my book so that you can better understand me, I just share with you something vague that doesn't really apply to anything, that you don't really have any real information, and I toss together what we can describe as a word salad, okay? And a word salad essentially is just a sentence that has words in it, but it doesn't actually mean anything. So when you go back home and you're thinking about trying to rehash what you've been through on this date with me and remember all the information that we've been discussing on this date, you realize that you really don't have a lot of information here. At least the information you got, you can't really use for anything because your understanding of me is very little. In fact, you maybe you never realize this, but at a certain point, you start to notice that majority of the conversation was really you talking about you and you giving me a better understanding of you. But you think to yourself, well, it's not that big a deal. Maybe he was just that interested in me and it felt really good to share. But this is so good for me. When I present myself to you, I have to be aware of the things that can seem like red flags to you. Remember, I'm doing all this to force you to fall in love with me. I don't want you to realize that I'm using a strategy on you. Instead of making this mistake that most men will make when they date you, that will actually alert you to something going on. Most men will present themselves as being perfect. You might think to yourself, yeah, that's a classic stage of narcissism, a man that thinks he's absolutely perfect and thinks he can do no wrong. Yeah, I can spot that from a mile away and I avoid those men. But see, this is where the tricks come in. Because my presentation is not going to come across like this. If I know I want to force you to fall in love with me, my presentation is a little bit more sneaky than this. Instead of presenting myself as the perfect man, I present myself as a flawed man. Now, what does that really mean? You might think, well, Tomisin, are you telling me that someone just telling me about who they are and their mistakes is bad? Let me explain to you the type of flawed man I will describe myself as, right? So I'll say I make small mistakes. What a lot of guys will do now is they'll tell you the mistakes that they make, but they'll make those mistakes almost sound like they're not mistakes. Let me give you a perfect example of that. So let's say you start asking a guy, what are some of the things you think like made your last relationship go wrong, okay? A smart man is not gonna say, oh, it was all my ex's fault. She did this, she did that, she did this, she did that. A smart man who knows how to manipulate you properly is gonna say something like, you know what? Where I went wrong is loving too hard. I'm gonna say it one more time because some of you miss it when they say it. Some of you don't hear it and you're just like, oh, that sounds so sweet. I made a mistake in loving too hard because I'm someone When I meet a woman, I get so invested and I fall so hard and I'm so passionate that sometimes it comes across the wrong way. And I think my pure, you know, intense, deep love for that woman pushed her away. And by the time I finish my story on how intense and deep and passionate my love is, instead of you thinking, oh, maybe I should reconsider dating you, you're actually crying now at the table and shedding tears for me because you're like, oh my God, what a sweet man that would admit to me how flawed he is and the mistakes that he could make in a way that it's like, oh my gosh, it's just so sad because I know what it's like to love someone so hard and so much and feel betrayed and abandoned, because now I'm presenting to you a situation where you feel like I'm being authentic with you, where you feel like I'm not presenting myself as the perfect man who doesn't make mistakes. But the truth of the matter is I'm not really telling you the real mistakes that I make. I might be someone who, of that passion, I punch walls. Of that intense love, I called my ex names, I threw her out, I ripped up her clothes, I did crazy stuff to her. But I describe it as intense passion and love because I know if I describe it as abuse, you're probably not going to want to be with me. But see, the men who are understanding that they want to come on this date and get you to fall in love with them, they know how to present the information in a way that sounds like a mistake, but it doesn't sound that bad. At least it won't make you want to run away from them. And in some cases, they'll present the mistake and make it sound so good that you'll actually feel like it's kind of like a positive instead of a negative. Because who's really going to go out on a date with someone and say, yeah, I really agree with you. It's so horrible that you love people so hard and so intensely. Who's really going to say to themselves, I was always looking for someone who would love me less intensely and less passionately? No one. But when I can make you feel like it's one of the deep, dark secrets in my heart and one of the biggest mistakes that can come through, now you feel like you found someone who is just slightly flawed, but flawed in a way that you can still work with that. In this scenario, I want to paint for you a narrative, if I'm trying to get you to fall in love with me, that in all of my relationships, I have been solely focused on marriage. That's all I care about. That's all I want. And that's all I invest my time and energy into. Why am I doing this? For a very specific reason that will become crystal clear to you at the end. But for now, I want you to believe in this idea that I'm only doing anything for the purpose of marriage. I'm also going to start creating this narrative in your mind that, and this is really interesting, the only time I have strayed from that pathway is when I have met people who are not on the same wavelength as me, like my ex, who wasn't looking for the same type of investment that I was. Because remember at the beginning, right, or earlier in my strategy and in my presentation, I presented a scenario in which I am flawed, but my flaws aren't really flaws. They're more like flaws in a sweet, kind way that'll make you shed a tear. And one of the things that I mentioned at flaws in my earlier stage was that, oh, I love people too hard. In fact, I love so hard that sometimes it pushes people away. But now that narrative, right, that smaller narrative earlier fits perfectly with this one that I'm trying to paint for you. And this is all going to work to my benefit because now I'm going to tell you a story and paint for you a picture in which every time I invest myself in a woman, she always finds it difficult to show up for me the way that I've always been trying to show up for her. Because as I'm moving towards the to the destination here of marriage, there are women that come into my life who aren't looking to get to that same destination. And those women that come to my life have their own motives and goals, and they sidetrack me from this destination. Or what ends up happening is as I'm shooting towards that, as I'm investing myself to get to this point and working so hard, they abandon me. Or they don't put their best foot forward. Or eventually I realize they're not as serious as me. Something very, very important is taking shape as I'm painting you this picture and I'm painting you this narrative. See, innocently, I'm making myself a sympathetic character in your eyes. As I'm making myself a sympathetic character in your eyes, you start to feel like my story, my life is a tragedy in which I am someone who has so much love to give, but no one sticks around long enough to receive that love from me. And that my seriousness towards getting to this destination has never been matched by any woman in my life. So now that you're on a date with me and I'm painting this narrative to you, you start to feel like, well, everyone else has never been able to be on the same wavelength as you. You've always been shooting for this place right here, and they've all been shooting for this place right here. You've invested while they have not invested. You've been serious. I want you to answer for me. What would you be thinking about when you hear this from me? Would you be thinking, I want to present myself as someone who is serious? Or would you be thinking, I want to present myself as someone who is unserious? This is where I want you to participate. The reason I wanted you all to participate is because I want you to see how, when I strategize and present a particular narrative and story to you, there really only is one option. But you don't realize you only had one option. But the thing about narratives, and we're getting a little bit deep into psychology here, but this is where I really want you to understand what's going on. The thing about narratives is when you paint them and structure them the right way, you can actually make people feel like they're making a choice that wasn't actually a choice. Because remember, we came on this date, and there's an understanding that if we're on this date, we're doing it for the purpose of building a relationship. And when we come with that understanding, and I know that that's your understanding as well, and I structure this narrative in a particular way, there really isn't another option here. There really isn't an option to present yourself as unserious. In fact, what I'm actually doing by painting this narrative for you and allowing you to make what you think is your own choice, I'm actually making it really obvious that the only thing you have to focus on is presenting yourself as serious as you can possibly look. And before, when I was the one approaching you, when I was the one courting you, when I was the one trying to get you and show you how I want to be with you. Now, I've just created a narrative that you've chose to believe in, and you've now made a choice that, oh my goodness, this man and who he is and what he's like, I need to make sure, right? Because remember, you think you made your own decision. I need to make sure that in this specific relationship, I present myself to be as serious as I can possibly be. So then when you make that decision, a lot of things change. Now, rather than you being the one on the date evaluating me and everything that I'm doing, because when you're evaluating me, you're now able to actually make choices. And you're able to say to yourself, do I like you? Do I not like you? Is this working for me? Is it not working for me? Do I like the vibe? Do I not? Now, instead, your whole aura and mind is fixated on, I need to make sure I don't look like these women, right, that have been in his life, and I look like the one woman who is serious in his life. See, when I first met you and I first started dating you and first started courting you, the opportunity became clear that me as a man who just has a little bit of flaws, but I'm fixable, I'm workable, I love hard, not too bad, and someone who also has a lot of the traits of a man that you're looking for, because remember, you like a man who can really be involved in your family, and I told you that's exactly the type of man that I am. And in many different ways, I've described myself to be perfectly in line with who you're looking for, to the point where you feel like there's some sort of divine power being bestowed upon you that is actually bringing us together, right? And so at this point, now you feel like, oh my gosh, this is my opportunity to be with someone who actually fits the mold of everything I've ever been looking for. And on top of that, this guy is so serious that the only thing he struggled with in his relationships is the fact that other women in his life have been so unserious that they never worked out. And I can finally be the first one to be serious to the point where we're both on the same wavelength, we're both on the same frequency, and we can actually be in a successful relationship. So this starts to look like a really good opportunity. But here comes the twist. Now that I've done all the work to make you feel like you've made your own choice to invest yourself heavily in me, I now close the door. I have made you feel like you've met the man that you were looking for. I've even presented myself as authentic as I could possibly look, just so I don't seem too perfect, to continue to lower your walls down. And because I gave you just enough of flaws that you didn't want to bother to look too much deeper into anything, it was good enough for you to feel like I'm being real with you. And so you didn't end up gathering any more information. Then I proceeded to present to you a situation in which all of my exes and all the other people in my life have been so unserious that the only thing I've struggled with in my relationships really is the fact that no one seems to be as serious about a relationship as I am. Now, when I close this door of opportunity, all of a sudden, the attention that I was giving you, all of a sudden, the validation that I was giving you, all of a sudden, the conversations that I seem to initiate, all of that goes and dwindles away to a complete stop and a complete halt. Now, I'm no longer reaching out as I once did. Now, I'm no longer planning dates as I once did. Now, I'm no longer seeming as interested or fascinated by you as I once did. And remember, my strategy is to force you to fall in love. Keyword, force you to fall in love. But the thing about it is, I can't actually twist your arm to fall in love with me. But I can put you in a scenario where instead of you feeling like you're accepting or denying me, I can put you in a scenario in which you're the one feeling like you have to prove something to me. So when I close this door of opportunity, and I make you feel like you may have missed out on your chance to be with an amazing man who is exactly what you've been looking for and has only had the problem of being so serious that other people weren't serious. Now you start to panic and you start to think to yourself, wait a second, did I do something wrong? Did I make a mistake? Did I eat my food wrong? Is my bum not big enough? What did I do that is making him turn away from me? Why did I lose out on my opportunity? Then you start, because remember, the narratives are so important. You start thinking back to the things that I said that I've struggled with a lot of women. You start thinking back to every conversation we've had, every sentence I've wrote, every text message I sent you, because now you're trying to sift through all the information in your mind to try and find where it is you may have went wrong or where things took a change. Now you land on the one most important piece of information that I wanted you to land on. You land on this information where, remember when I discussed with you how every other woman in my life has made the mistake of not being as serious as me. And that has made my relationships not work out. Now you're convinced, because of that narrative that I painted for you, that this door of opportunity has closed because you also presented yourself as unserious as all of those other women. So now you're thinking to yourself, what do I need to do? I need to prove myself to him. I need to do some reaching out now. I need to do some asking him on dates now. I need to check in with him. I need to check up on him. I need to show him that I care. I need to show him that I'm concerned. I need to show him that I really want this to work. And as you continue to invest in me, I let you invest. When you reach out, that's when I reach back to you. When you ask me out on a date, that's when I go out with you. When you make the effort of spending time with me and scheduling, that's when I actually spend some time with you. Now, all of a sudden, instead of giving you a choice of whether to accept me in your life or deny me, I've actually put you in a position where you're no longer thinking of accepting or denying anything. you're thinking about proving something to me. And inadvertently and indirectly, I've actually forced you to fall in love with me because you thought you had a choice, but you didn't realize that your choice was gone when your mindset changed from thinking about whether or not you want to be with me to thinking about how you're going to prove yourself to me. Because there is no choice of do I love that person or not when your mind is focused on proving yourself to that person. Because the understanding is I already want that person. So there's nothing to consider or think about on that end. All I'm thinking about is making myself acceptable to that other person. So just that fast, when I flip the script that way and you play into the narrative and you play into the scheme, it's all worked. And it's worked out in my favor. Because now you don't make a choice, right? You don't have a choice of whether to love me or not. You already love me, right? You're forced to love me through the fact that you're trying to prove something to me. And as long as I continue to keep you in this mind state of proving something to me, and as long as I continue to just make you feel like it's just out of reach for you, and you're just not good enough as a wife, or you're just not good enough as a romantic partner, you will continue to extend yourself trying to prove that thing to me that you've been trying to prove from the very beginning. And never once throughout that entire time will you ever be considering to yourself, is that guy the guy that I'm looking for?